Okay, start the recording. Okay, so welcome along, everyone. This is part two for this week's lectures on the mind and body. So yeah, this is lecture number 14, all about embodiment, the sociology of the body. This course has been designed by Mark Cresswell, adapted by Faye Vladstone and myself, James Addicott. So yeah, I'll be taking you through today's lecture. Please, any comments or questions, I'll give you a couple of spaces to ask some questions, but as we go along, if you've got questions, do feel free to ask them in the comments box. As always, we're sort of covering self-harm and issues to do with the mind and body this week. So there's you've had this link before, it's in a couple of other slides, but giving you that option again to opt out, and also the contact details for the student wellbeing services. We're sort of touching on anorexia again today, and issues to do with self-harm, and yeah, if you know anyone or experiencing any of these sort of issues, contact the student wellbeing services. They'll be able to help you, or point you in the right direction, or even just sort of like listen to your concerns and your problems. So feel free to give them a call. That's a service that's part of your university facility. Yeah, so today we're looking at the second part of this dualism to do with the mind and body. Yeah, we're looking at embodiment. Yesterday's lecture was all about the mind. If you missed that, that's available online. You could go back and watch that. So yeah, we're interested in the sociology of deviancy in the mind and body, you might consider. And we might also think about different forms of social control, such as capitalism, ideology, discipline, power, and patriarchy, and the way those affect the human mind and the human body as an individual, and then as a collective as well. How a collective of people's bodies can be affected by ideology or patriarchy, etc. So there has, until now, been a little bit of an overemphasis, people say. Well, not until now, until like the last 100 years or so. Academia was sort of preoccupied, if you like, with the human mind. It's a sort of criticism of modern academics or modern knowledge, is that it was very much centered around the human being, and a particular attention paid to the human's mind. So like an example of this is René Descartes, who said in the 1600s, I think it was, I might need to Google that, I think it was 1600s. He said this famous phrase, cogito ergo sum, which is Latin for I think, therefore I am. So that was sort of, one of his arguments, or his sort of propositions, if you like, that the starting point of human knowledge is human experience. So without a sort of thinking human subject, there would be no such thing as human knowledge. Yeah, so we need a thinker as a sort of starting point for knowledge. So a sort of quite famous quote. But what a lot of sociologists do is refer back to this idea, and point out that it suggests that the starting point of human existence is in the mind, in the human mind, and not the human body. Which, if you think about it, is pretty crazy. We're sort of born as babies, aren't we? And before we're babies, we're sort of parts of our parents' bodies, or exist within our parents' bodies. But before we have consciousness, it was sort of we're sort of flesh and skin, aren't we? Before we get our thinking and our thoughts. So this is sort of like pointed out as perhaps a good idea. I think therefore I am, but also sort of problematic in terms of overemphasizing the importance of the human mind rather than thinking about the human body as well. So it separates the human mind from the human body, hence the mind-body dualism. Sorry, there's no attendance code for today's session, so apologies for that. I think I'm covering for the lectures today, so I haven't been given a code to pass on, but yeah. Okay, also this sort of modern emphasis on mind over the body, or mind over matter. A lot of other people, you'll be able to find this in sort of writing and literature on the mind-body dualism, but people point out that a lot of academic thinking or a lot of knowledge is based in religious thinking about the human being and what humans are. And you know, this kind of famous separation between the mind, the body, and the soul. And a lot of, if you think about it, sort of like a lot of meditation, a lot of prayer has much to do with thinking or clearing the mind, if you like, and trying to clear the mind of thoughts. But still, very much, you know, the starting point is on the mind, or you know, people's relationships with God is very traditionally sort of mediated through the mind. So people would pray before they went to bed, and people still do pray before they went to bed, but that sort of relationship with God and a higher power is very much mediated through the mind rather than the human body. And a lot of people go on to point out that the human body, in a lot of sort of religious discourses and a lot of religious talk, is very much a place of sexuality and perhaps sin, the flesh, and sort of touch and bodily senses, and perhaps as humans we sort of have been encouraged to use our minds to control our bodily functions, if you like, or our bodily feelings. So yeah, you might attribute this sort of overemphasis on the mind to religion. And also it's quite interesting, if you go back and look at the origins of academia and where universities came from, and where studies of knowledge came from, a lot of it is rooted in religious thinking. So theology, for example, and debates around the philosophy of religion are the sort of origins of academic studies, which is what we're doing today. But in the past, it would have been very much about ideas about God and existence. And this was done by sort of monks or academics who would act and behave very much like monks, and spend a lot of time not working, not invested in sort of physical labor, but thinking and sat down and reading books. But academia had a lot to do with thinking and cognitive processes rather than physical bodily work and bodily functions. So that's also quite an interesting take on this as well, this sort of mind-body dualism. So yeah, I'm saying all of this to get the point across that there has been this overemphasis in the past on the human mind, and an overlooking or underemphasis on the human body, which is what a lot of sociologists have picked up on. And this guy, Brian Turner, is quite largely credited for sort of bringing the human body back into discussion, or starting to think about the sociology of the human body rather than the mind, which is what we looked at yesterday. So yeah, you might take Brian Turner as your starting point in the embodiment of was the sociology of the body, and discussion about embodiment. But as we will see, there's other sociologists who paved the way for Brian Turner to establish his sociology of the body. But anyway, he makes this claim, and he puts across this argument that contemporary sociology has little to say about the most obvious fact that human existence, namely that human beings have, and to some extent are, bodies. There exists a theoretical prudity with respect to human corporality, which constitutes an analytical gap in the core of sociological inquiry. So so there's sort of like an analytical gap, a missing link, if you like, between the mind and the body. And Brian Turner just sort of basically pointing out that human existence, all humans have bodies, so we have to sort of take that into consideration. Bodies are important. So and also this word corporeal means, or is an adjective to describe the relationship to a person's body, and opposed to their spirit and their mind, if you like. We sort of have to take this embodied experience of existence into consideration if we're going to do sociology properly. You might put it in those terms. So there's this book, The Body in Society, third edition. So if you're interested in this topic, definitely go and search that book out. I'm sure you'll find it in the library. So this has led to a rise of sociological interest in the human body. We'll discuss these two sort of founding thinkers, if you like. So we'll have a look in a moment at the ideas of Karl Marx, and particularly the ideas of Michel Foucault. But also in this lecture, we're going to be having a look at the impact of feminism. Also, other sort of factors that have made the human body interesting to sociology would include aging and longevity, the rise of leisure and consumption activities, also increasing technologies of control of the bodies. Does anyone here have a Fitbit? Or is anyone getting a Fitbit for Christmas? Silence is golden. I don't have a Fitbit myself, but I do have on my Apple iPhone. It's sort of keeping track of me. I think I can find out somewhere in the app how many steps that I've taken every day. Evie says both your parents have Fitbits. Yeah, it's sort of new technologies, aren't they? And some people can't leave the house without their Fitbit on, and it's an interesting way of in a way it's not internal to the body, it's sort of external technology on the body, but it sort of regulates and monitors and can regulate the way our bodies act and behave if we pay close attention to our Fitbit and allow it to, or allow its feedback to affect the way we act and behave. Anyway, increased interest in pathologies of the body, such as self-harm and eating disorders. So all of these factors give rise to a sociological interest in the human body. I've got a photograph here as well of some private school boys in a gymnasium, a bit of a historical photograph. And I remember when I did my undergraduate degrees, they sort of made a big emphasis on private school boys, where these young chaps are sort of encouraged to take part in healthy activities to build the body, and apparently it's a sort of a way of, you can sort of distinguish private school boys because they have a certain sort of physique and form, which comes as part of their education. Also, feminism, is, as we'll see later on, is very important for our consideration of the human body, especially the sort of the biology of the female body. a woman's experience of her body is fundamental to feminism, and aspects of life such as childbirth, menstruation, menopause, and sexuality. As Simon de Beauvoir points out, are really important aspects of a woman's existence in the world. Okay, and also in terms of social theory and sociology, a sort of starting point as well, in terms of a re-emphasis on the human body, comes from Karl Marx. So Karl Marx famously critiqued Hegel, who was an Enlightenment philosopher, and Hegel's idea of pure thought and absolute spirit. So this was Hegel's idea of the relationship between humans and the objects that surround us. And Hegel argued that the humans could. There was a relationship between human subjects and material objects in the world. And this again was very much centered around the thinking and the perception of a human being about the objects in the material world. And Marx argued that there was this emphasis on ideas and idealism, and what Hegel and a lot of thinkers were doing were considering or failing to consider the material conditions of existence in the real world around us. Ideas don't just sort of like exist independently of human beings, and we lived in a material surroundings. So what we eat for breakfast, or the sofas that we sit on, or the products that we produce when we go to work, create a material reality for us, within which we have ideas and we do our thinking. So life is not determined by consciousness alone, but consciousness is determined by life. So we need sort of lungs and water and food to eat in order for us to do our thinking. So that's one sort of take, one way into this mind-body dualism provided by Marx. Also, another key thinker who is interested in the human body is Michel Foucault. So we've already discussed Foucault in previous sessions. He is a key kind of philosopher and contributes a lot to the social sciences. And his theory of biopower, or biological power, is really key here. So just to recap, Foucault theorized that there was a transition taking place in modern societies, and this was a distribution of power. So in the old days, in the old empires of the past, whether it's sort of the samurai in Japan, or the kingdoms of Prussia, or the old kingdoms of England, you'd have a sort of a king and a monarch who had sovereign power, and that was sort of top-down hierarchical power, and often that power revolved around the ability to take life away from people. And Foucault gives the example of a Roman family where the head, the patriarch of a Roman family, the father of the Roman family, was empowered with the ability to take the life of their child or slave at their own will. They sort of had that power and the capacity to do that. But by today's standards, that is unimaginable, and we live in a new era of biopower, which has a lot to do with surveillance and social surveillance, and also self-surveillance. So, we've spoken about this model of the panopticon prison and the way in which power and surveillance is distributed throughout this prison, and the people with power keep an eye on the prisoners, who in turn sort of keep an eye on their own actions and behavior. and normalize the rules of the prison, and sort of regulate and monitor their own actions and behavior. So this is a new era of what Foucault called biopower. Sovereign power was all about the power over death, whereas biopower is all about power over life. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that means. So power over life involved two basic forms. So the first form, and this is a quote here from Foucault, the first form of power was centered on the body as a machine. Its disciplining, the optimization of its capabilities, the extortion of its forces, the paralleled increase in its usefulness and its docility, the integration into systems of efficient and economic control. So there's a famous, I guess you call it, there's a term that Foucault used, which was docile bodies. So on the one hand, human bodies are sort of docile. So if you were a prison in one of these panoptic prisons, you may sort of conform to the rules and act in ways that are not rebellious, and you sort of comply with the rules. And so in that sense, you're sort of docile, and you carry out your everyday activities. And you may look out the window in the morning and see people sort of walking on the way to work, or getting in their cars and sort of driving to work. And there's sort of like this anti-rebellious or non-rebellious way about them. They're sort of going along with the rules of the system. So you might consider those people to be, like docile bodies. But then also there's this idea of usefulness. So we're disciplined as well to be useful to the social system. So, we may, pick up our next door neighbour's newspapers off the doorstep and post it through the letterbox, or, do things to help out in society. And we sort of play useful, functional roles in society. So that's one way in which power over life has evolved. We are docile bodies. The second way is the species body. And this is another quote on the same page from Foucault. So the body is imbued with the mechanics of life and servicing as the basis of biological processes. Propagation, births and mortality, the level of health, life expectancy and longevity, all the conditions that can cause these to vary. So on the one hand, we sort of play this mechanical role within the social system, a useful, docile role within the social system of biopower. But then on the other hand, we have this sort of reproductive function that we play within the system, which is all based around life and procreation. So that's sort of, the way in which we're disciplined by this system of biopower, which is life, a power over life. So power over life evolved in two basic forms. The first is disciplines, autonomy politics of the human body, and then in the second way, regulatory controls, a biopolitics of the human population. So Foucault is not only talking about the body of individual people, so you and I, but then also, the social body as a whole, so the body politic. And I always show this image. This is taken from a very old book called The Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. And you can see this big, huge, enormous human being, and the body of that person is constituted by lots of individual people, if you look into his torso. And it's that idea that as each of us as individual people contribute towards a greater social body. So in two ways, biopower works on the individual body, and then in turn that works on the social body. So let's have a little breather here. It's 9:25. I'm going to have a little sip of my coffee, but yeah, does anyone have any questions on the sort of theoretical part of this lecture so far? If you don't have any questions, you just good question. Okay. Yeah, so someone's asked about monism, which is yeah. I've had to like Google this. I'm not going to lie, I Googled it or looked it up in the dictionary. So it comes from philosophy and theology. So mon meaning one. Yeah, I get the question. Yeah, so you could also think about the human body as in terms of holism as well. So yeah, you can treat the human being in monistic terms, or in terms of monism as one complete being. So rather than a mind-body dualism, there is one person, one whole sort of subject. Or holistic approaches, sort of tend to take into consideration other factors such as the environment, and the whole experience of a person. So that's a good question. Amelia, is that the question you were sort of getting to in your question? Yeah, Evie. So yeah, the idea of pure thought. So I guess uh, it, yeah, there's a sort of in Hegel's idea there was a subject and object relationship. So there was a human subject and a material object such as a coffee cup, and Hegel was very interested about how do we know what a coffee cup is? How do we generate knowledge about coffee cups, or how do we know about the objects in the world that surround us? And it was his emphasis was very much to do with sort of thinking about these objects, so looking at objects and thinking how they came to exist in the world. And I think Marx, famously, people say Marx turned Hegel on his head. And Marx says, if you look at these material objects of the world, coffee cups come from people who manufacture and produce or create coffee cups. The clay that creates coffee cups is a material taken from the physical world. So there's no point sort of sitting around thinking about how these things came to exist. We're better off looking at the material conditions and the physical processes, how things grow, and how humans evolve. First of all, it's important that humans are born, rather than what they're thinking about the world. I hope that explains it a bit better. Welcome. It's an interesting thought. Have a look. Have a watch. Have a look. I quite enjoy sort of watching like snippet philosophy videos on YouTube. Sometimes you get like Hegel explained in under a minute, and you can watch these videos, and they'll just give you a sort of like brief digest on Hegel's thoughts. But yeah, he's quite an important or key thinker, Enlightenment thinker. So and Marx also based a lot of his philosophy off of Hegel's philosophy. So Marx was a Hegelian, but rather than thinking about ideas and idealism, Marx was famous for being a materialist and thinking about the material world in which we live, which can include the physical body and what we do as workers. Manual labour, which is all about, you know, the using of human hands to create material products. Anyway, thanks for the questions. Okay, let's go on. Any more questions, pop them in the comments box as we go. So, okay, now we're going to look at use these theories and these ideas and sort of apply them to human bodies, and also we'll take a turn and we'll have a look at a bit more sort of feminism as we go through as well. So we'll think now about sort of Marxist feminism as a starting point, and this generally sort of takes, or some Marxist feminists take women's bodies in Marxist terms, in material terms, and consider them as a means of production. So for Marx, a means of production would include like tools, technologies, maybe a factory. Capital includes different forms of producing, different ways of producing things, means of production or ways of producing things. And a woman's body, some Marxist feminists point out, is a way of producing human beings. So under the conditions of capitalism, we can consider the female body as a sort of means of production. So Marxist feminists argue that a woman's role in the family benefits capitalism in three basic ways. So women perform domestic labour on an unpaid basis and provide care for the current and increasingly the previous generation of workers. Women also reproduce and socialise the next generation of workers. So I think that's a key point here in sort of Marxist feminism. The female body is a sort of site of reproduction, a means of production, and it's producing and generating future workers for a system of exploitation, which is pretty bleak, isn't it? And then the third point is women consume the goods and services produced by capitalism. So in many ways, you know, to reproduce the next generation of workers, women might have to consume goods and services produced by capitalism that enables that future generation of workers. So prams, cots, different products for feeding children. Yeah, so there's a link there to a reading which will introduce you to a bit more about Marxist feminism, and you could go on to read more about that, but I thought that's an important idea to include in our discussion of the body. But what we'll get into is this more general idea in feminism that women's bodies are sites of oppression and struggle. So this course, you know, we're interested in social control and deviance, and in terms of social control, you can consider patriarchy, or as many feminists do, a form of social control, and then, you know, individual choices as a form of deviancy against that given social control. So we'll look at the female body in these terms. There's a couple of images there, some literature on this. Actually, before I go on, let me just ask everyone on this call, type in the text box if you could change any part of your body, which part of your body would you change? Okay, I'm a stomach person as well. I do. Nose, stomach, nose, eyes, torso, definitely stomach, legs. It's interesting. I always think this when I say this to my students, so you'll have heard me say this before, that every time I'm at the checkout at Tesco's, I look at Men's Health magazine, and I suddenly find myself, sucking my stomach in and trying to stand with an upright back and, put my shoulders back and try my best to look as if I've got a, six pack under my jumper. But truth be known, it's a bit of a, yeah, it's like a one pack basically. It's not even a one pack. It's more of a big pouch. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't make it onto the cover of Men's Health magazine. That's for sure. And try as hard as I can. I cannot get rid of that pouch. It's sort of with me for life. I've come to live with it. Anyway. So yeah, let's get thinking about the human body and cosmetics and how we might be able to transform our bodies under a system of surveillance or under a system of capitalism. So feminism and cosmetic surgery. So here's some facts and figures, if you like. So over 28,000 procedures took place in 2018, a small increase of 0.1% on 2017. Women underwent 92% of all cosmetic procedures recorded, which is quite staggering, isn't it? Sort of less than 10% for men and 92% for women. And as in 2017, the three most popular procedures for women were breast augmentation, breast reduction, and I cannot pronounce that, but blepharoplasty, eyelid surgery. The biggest increase for women were liposuction, which rose 12%, and facelifts, which rose 9%. Male cosmetic surgery dropped by 4.7%. So that's quite interesting sort of statistics. I would have thought eyelid surgery would have been the top ones, to be honest. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and I think what we can see here is, this provides really good evidence to support the idea that women are sort of hugely affected by ideas of bodies and the human body, and maybe a sort of a level of dissatisfaction or discontentment with their body. I don't know, but if you were going to write an essay on this topic, this would provide a good piece of evidence to support the case that women are more affected by issues related to the body than the men. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? With Asian models trying their best to have bigger eyes. I lived in Taiwan for a couple of years, and it's, you're in the news agents, and you look at the magazines, and they all have these sort of big-eyed sort of manga cartoon style models on the cover, and this sort of real desire of a lot of women in Asia to have those sort of big eyes. I don't know whether that's to do with sort of manga, the sort of manga, Japanese manga look, or whether it's to do with sort of Western ideas and Asia, Eastern women trying to look like Western women. I don't know, but I'm sure there's lots of literature out there about that. Eurocentric standard, absolutely, Amelia. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So they want to have double eyelids instead of monolids that they're born with. Yeah, what is a double eyelid? Um, I'm going to carry on talking while this conversation goes on. Don't let me stop you. It's quite interesting discussion here in the comments box. Anyway, the rise of cosmetic surgery. So we might consider this quote that we've just looked at in terms of Foucault's theory of power and how that affects the human body. So there's been the development of new medical techniques and technologies. So there's sort of like academic research done into the manipulation of human bodies and new technologies in science and scientific disciplines that have arisen from this knowledge. And there's sort of experts in that field who have power in their discipline and are able to affect human bodies through their knowledge and their distribution of knowledge. There's the rise of market model of medicine. There's sort of a rise of a consumerist culture associated with postmodernism and post-industrialism. So we're all busy shopping, aren't we, nowadays? And then the rise of the idea of the human body as an object and a personal project. And as Foucault suggests, this sort of sense of self-surveillance and self-discipline as well. So we sort of treat our bodies like an object and very much like a commodity, and we can buy new parts for our body and adjust it and adapt it according to the demands of our consumerist culture. It's quite sort of a postmodern idea, and Foucault was a postmodernist. Learning about what a monolith and a yeah, very interesting. Okay, so the body becomes a personal project. So the objectification of our own bodies and increasing our sexual attractiveness and usefulness can be something that we're increasingly aware and concerned about. And also projecting a different image to the public of our body, which can include tattooing and piercing. And this is becoming increasingly relevant as a way of existing in the modern or the postmodern world for both men and women. I guess especially on social media, isn't it? We're sort of like before we even get into contact with someone or begin talking to them on these sort of dating apps and stuff, you sort of got a pretty good idea of what their body looks like. They've already sort of shown you whether or not they got six-pack abs or choosing to cover everything up, people with pretty good bodies are sort of encouraged to show those off and get lots of likes, and it becomes a bit of sort of an economy of likes as well. So you can do very well on social media through having a good body. So a real emphasis in the postmodern culture on the human body. And if we think about this in feminist terms, using a thinker like Cathy Davis, we can begin sort of thinking about this body culture in different ways. So Cathy Davis rejected psychological explanations for cosmetic surgery, and instead she located her explanation in terms of cultures of femininity and bodily presentation. So it's not so much, if we want to get behind this and begin to understand why people are beginning to pay such attention to their bodies. We're much better off sort of looking into the culture of bodies and physical exercise, rather than trying to understand this at a psychological level. So this is sort of like a cultural manifestation. And Davis refers to two types of feminist explanation for understanding cosmetic surgery. So the first approach is what she calls, or is the modernist feminist approach. and this focuses on beauty regimes and femininity as a form of oppression or patriarchal oppression of women. So women are almost sort of forced to look, act, and behave in certain ways to conform to standards uh, imposed on them by dominant men. And this is a form of social control. So men at the top of the patriarchal hierarchy of sort of distributing ideas to the general population about what women should look like, how they should act and behave, and how their bodies should be shaped. And women were seen as forced into adopting certain forms of appearances or styles in order to conform to these rules and norms of male heterosexuality or heteronormativity. You often get this with sort of theories of ideology or theories of social control. That's sort of all well and good, and we sort of get that idea that a leading class or a ruling class of men are sort of distributing these ideas of what women should look like, how they should act and behave, and what their bodies should be like. However, not all women have throughout history conformed to these standards. Women can pick and choose, what their bodies look like. Some women are, people are born in different ways. People have different bodies, and people go through different stages of life as well. How the body looks when a woman is pregnant is completely different to how her body may have looked when she was at university, in the rowing team, which may look completely different to later on in life. So that this theory of social control and patriarchy perhaps gives us some idea of why women conform to certain standards. However, it fails to explain sort of agency and choice and the sort of real lived experience of women. And this is what Cathy Davis wanted to get across, is that it's a bit of a criticism of theories of patriarchy and totalitarian social control. So there's some degree of choice here. So cosmetic surgery was seen as the same light as foot binding, for example, the manipulation of the body, and women were framed as sort of victims, often displaying false consciousness or duped into thinking this is the way they should look. They think they're improving their looks, but actually they're being harmed by powerful medical professions. So that's the sort of the modern standpoint, or the modern feminist standpoint on the body. However, Davis goes on to point out there's this sort of turn, a postmodernist feminism, and this suggests a little bit more agency, that for example, women can undergo cosmetic surgery to improve their looks or to feel more comfortable. I had a friend in college who had a breast reduction because she was really in a lot of pain. And as a result, she had a better life after having her breast size reduced. So cosmetic surgery in this postmodernist view is part of the normalization process of women's bodies. It starts to be seen as a normal option, as a body project. So yeah, we're normalized in this postmodern culture into thinking and accepting that body manipulation is part of our modern culture. We have those choices to hand. And we sort of accept that people take those choices. If we watch Love Island, there's sort of like quite a bit of Botox and liposuction on Love Island, but that's sort of an aesthetic and a way of life, isn't it? Nowadays, we don't sort of judge those people as sort of conforming to patriarchy. We just sort of accept that people, are more comfortable after taking those choices. Women can exercise genuine choice in this model. However, it does not seem as if it's choice within a narrow definition of what femininity could be, you could argue. So criticisms by Davis, both these models, modern and postmodern, objectify the body. The body becomes a thing that women change. Davis says that many of these procedures are about the self and the woman's complex relationship to herself and her body. Neither gives women much agency or freedom to deviate, still sort of conforming to patriarchy. However, there is, some degree of agency. Both approaches hide a moral condemnation of women, i.e., cultural dupes, or simply compliant to patriarchal control, and do not understand the complex life experience of women. Cosmetic surgery for Davis is part of a dilemma of how to be and appear normal, how to be and appear a normal woman. So yeah, I guess part of our postmodern existence, and men can take this on board as well. I guess I've given the example of sort of wanting to have a six-pack, for example. And I know a lot of guys are sort of quite conscious of that and go to the gym for a lot of reasons to do with that. But having this sort of dilemma of having these choices available to us is a dilemma in this postmodern age. Okay, I've keeping an eye on the time, so we'll get to the conclusion. So Davis put, I concluded that it makes more sense to frame cosmetic surgery as an intervention in identity than as a beauty practice. Linking cosmetic surgery to identity allowed me to acknowledge the gravity of women's suffering and to treat their desire for cosmetic surgery as more than a matter of having had ideological wool pulled over their eyes. Cosmetic surgery may seem like the best course of action for an individual woman, given the circumstances of her life. So, yeah, just sort of taking into consider sort of the element of social control, which is patriarchy, and different phases of patriarchy and the culture of sort of patriarchy and social control, but then also the individual experiences of individual women and different circumstances of life and how they might deviate or conform to those sort of standards set on them by a patriarchal society. All right, I'm going to bring this to an end. As we close up today, I'll read through the concluding style slides. There are more on this. For example, there's a slide here on Foucault's theory and the body mass index. We've done that before in previous lectures, but we might consider social norms and how our weight should be according to scientific or medical standards, and how we might deviate or conform to those norms of the body mass index. And also in terms of labeling theory, how people who are labeled anorexic might deviate from those medical norms and perhaps sort of outsided from certain social groups as a result. All in all, the slide's not uploading. So if you're planning to write your essay on this topic, you might consider that some theoretical perspectives go well together, while some are more contrasting. In terms of theories of embodiment, they mix well, or they go well with theories such as feminism or Foucault. the general picture is that the human body is surrounded by social rules and moral norms, which define and dictate what is perceived as normal in society. And deviance arises when the normal body habits are departed from. There's a bit there on Crossley's theories of RBTs, but you can go back and have a look at those when the slides are up. Feel free to email me if you'd like to know more. There's no attendance code, sorry, Karen. Thank you very much for your comments and questions today. Any more comments, please feel free to put them in the comment box now. Otherwise, thank you for attending, and I'll see you in seminars this week. Good stuff. Lovely. Thanks, Emma. Cheers, Josh. Cheers, Jenna. Cheers, Mei Ling. Have a good day.